They say a man of the land has a heart as dry as the soil beneath his boots. But what if I told you that a solitary rancher, scarred by tragedy, opened the door of his home to a widow with 3 children, and it completely changed his life? Do you believe a stranger can become the salvation of an entire family? That a single gesture can heal years of pain? This story will shatter everything you thought you knew about love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Mateo Duarte was born in a small rural village, the only child of a couple who never quite knew what to do with him. His father was a harsh man, quick-tempered and little inclined to affection. His mother, a timid, fearful woman who could never shield him from the storms that raged inside their home. When Mateo was only 7, his father vanished without a trace. Some said he had run from the hard life of the fields. Others claimed drink had carried him far away. But for the boy, his father's disappearance was the first of many abandonments. After his mother's early death, caused by an illness no village doctor knew how to treat in time, Mateo was handed over to his maternal grandparents, 2 stern, unyielding elders who had spent their lives working the land and believed suffering was life's only true teacher. From early on, the boy learned to stand up on his own. What he didn't have, he had to earn. What fell, he picked up again, often with tears hidden from sight. By the age of 10, he was already tying oxen for farm work. At 12, he helped with the harvest, hauled heavy sacks, and cleaned the barn with calloused hands. The boy who once dreamed of a different future soon realized his life was bound to the hardness of the land. His grandparents, though strict, were his shelter and the only family he had left. And in those quiet days, between the chirping of crickets and the scent of damp soil, Mateo learned to hear the countryside's secrets, the rhythm of the seasons, the wind whispering through the leaves, the distant calls of animals. It was only at 18 that he met Clara, a gentle young woman who worked helping the neighbor. Their meeting was simple, at the village market, between fruit stalls and the aroma of fresh bread. Clara was like a ray of light breaking through the darkness he carried. She believed in a love that healed, in dreams that could be built, in a better future. For the first time, Mateo felt he could be more than the loneliness that had shaped him. With Clara, he found shelter for his wounded heart. They married in the fall, in a modest ceremony surrounded by friends and family. The Santa Cruz ranch came alive with Clara's presence. Her laughter echoed through the house, the scent of her homemade meals drifted through the air, and even the soil seemed more fertile. 4 years, they lived between work and hope, weaving a routine of sweat and love. But Mateo's happiness was fleeting. Clara fell ill suddenly. What began as a harmless fever turned into something severe and irreversible. Sleepy nights were replaced by anxious vigils, days by long silences. Mateo watched the woman he loved wither away, felt the world slip through his fingers. When Clara passed, she took with her all the light from the ranch and from his life. From that moment, Mateo withdrew into himself. The solitude that had once been a companion became a prison. He no longer knew how to smile, no longer knew how to dream. Each morning followed the same empty ritual: cold coffee, hard floor, wind, and silence. The rancher who once carried hope now bore only the invisible scars of his heart. Mateo began living for the land alone. He tended to the cattle as if they were his last remaining friends. Storm or sun, rain or dust, it didn't matter, as long as he kept the ranch alive. He spoke little, avoided contact. He preferred the company of the wind and the open fields. That morning, the sun rose pale behind the dry hills, casting the land in a shade of old gold. The lowing of cattle in the distance, the wind whistling through the fences, and the creak of the rusted gate were the only voices in that forgotten corner of the world. Mateo expected nothing from life anymore. He woke before dawn, pulled on his boots, filled the old kettle with coffee, and began the same routine, feeding the animals, fixing whatever the last storm had broken, facing mud and dust like a man who did it not out of love, but instinct. When he returned home, silence welcomed him like an old friend. He removed his hat, ran a hand through his unshaven beard, and sat in the wooden chair molded to the shape of his body. The coffee had gone cold, as always. But he drank it anyway. The photograph of his late wife on the cabinet beside him was covered in dust. He hadn't cleaned it in weeks. He was afraid to look into her eyes and remember what he had lost. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. Matteo closed the windows with the care of someone who had already lost a roof to the wind. Solitude wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. And even though he told himself he'd grown used to it, deep down, a part of him was still waiting for something. Or someone. That night, he lay in bed listening to the first drops of rain strike the roof. The drip of water from the leaks, the groan of old wooden beams, the wind howling through the gaps in the door. Everything was familiar, everything repeated. What he didn't know was that, in the coming hours, fate would change the course of his story. That someone was out there, walking through the storm. That desperate footsteps would soon pound on his door. And that, despite all the scars he carried, his heart was still capable of beating for someone. Matteo could barely close his eyes that night. The storm raged outside, as if the sky itself were furious with the world. He felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on his chest, an emptiness even physical exhaustion couldn't fill. He thought of Clara, her smile, the warmth her presence once brought to the empty house. But the memory, instead of warming him, seemed to cut his soul with a sharp blade. When the first lightning bolt split the horizon, a distant sound broke the silence of the ranch. A rapid, desperate knocking at the front door made Matteo lift his head. His breath caught in his chest. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at that hour of the night. Another knock, louder this time, almost like a plea for help. Matteo's hardened heart beat faster, not from excitement, but from curiosity and the survival instinct that still pulsed in his body. He rose slowly, his heavy steps creaking across the wooden floor. With a firm push, he opened the door to reveal a woman drenched from head to toe, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes desperate, her arms wrapped around 3 small children who shivered from cold and fear. The wind and rain cut like blades, and the chill seeped into the bones, but what struck Matteo most was the woman's expression, a blend of sheer exhaustion and an almost impossible determination. She spoke without truly asking, almost begging. "Please, we have nowhere else to go. Please, let me stay with them, just for tonight." Matteo felt the tightness in his chest squeeze harder. No words came to his throat, yet something in that scene sparked a flicker he thought had been extinguished forever. He hesitated, shadows from the past whispering for him to shut the door, to protect his empty world. But the frantic pounding of the woman's heart, the muffled sobs of the children, were a call he could not ignore. "Come in," he said without a smile, his voice rough and steady. They crossed the threshold like ghosts invading his sanctuary, wet, trembling, bringing with them a reality Matteo had long since buried. As he guided Isabel and the children inside, Matteo's cold eyes took in every detail, the worn clothes, the tear-brimmed eyes, the thin frames. It was a cruel reminder of the fragility of human life, something he had tried to avoid facing. He lit the fire in the hearth, the warmth slowly beginning to fill the room, and Isabel settled the children in the most sheltered corner of the house. She trembled, yet her eyes held a quiet strength that unsettled him, stirring in him a confusing mix of empathy and mistrust. The night dragged on slowly in that modest home, the fire crackling with an almost comforting sound. Matteo watched Isabel's tired face as she tried, and failed, to soothe the 3 little ones who slept curled up under threadbare blankets in the corner of the room. The silence between them was heavy, laden with unspoken words and restrained emotions. Matteo sat in a chair at a distance, his gaze fixed on the flames. He was not a man given to easy gestures, and the presence of this family in his solitary world stirred something he had buried long ago. He still didn't know if it was fear, anger, or a complex mix of both. Isabel avoided his eyes. She felt like an intruder in that space, a burden to a man already carrying so much pain. She didn't know whether she should thank him, apologize, or simply disappear come morning. The children huddled timidly behind her. The oldest, Anna, watched Mateo warily, as if the silent giant could collapse at any moment. The younger ones, Luis and Sofia, drifted between sleep and fear, clutching at their mother's dress. After a long silence, Mateo stood and went to the small, makeshift kitchen. He returned with a piece of hard bread and a bit of simple cheese. Sitting again, he silently divided the food. Isabel looked at him in surprise but said nothing. She accepted the gesture like a small bridge being built between them. "I don't have much," Mateo said, his coarse voice breaking the stillness. "But what I have, you'll share." Isabel thanked him with a nod, her eyes glistening. For the first time in a long while, she felt she wasn't completely alone. But something had shifted that night, something even he couldn't explain. That desperate knock at his door had cracked open a small gap in the wall he had built around his heart. And for the first time in a long time, he felt he might not be as alone as he thought. The next morning, Isabel awoke to the soft light spilling through the window of the small house. When she opened her eyes, she realized the rancher was no longer there. The bed still held traces of warmth, but he had already gone out to face the new day alone. She rose carefully so as not to wake the children and went to the room where they slept, gently rousing them with tender touches and soft whispers. "Come on, my loves, it's time to get up." Anna's eyes opened slowly, followed by Luis and Sofia, still sleepy and clinging to their blankets. Isabel dressed them with care, trying to hide the unease she felt when thinking about the future, though at the same time there was a strange sense of comfort in being in that place, despite everything. A short while later, the sound of steady footsteps came from outside, approaching the door. Mateo entered carrying a simple sack in his hands, his face tired but marked by a quiet determination. "I went to the village to get some things for you," he said, setting the sack down on the floor. Isabel gave him a timid smile, one carrying both gratitude and hope. "Thank you," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. He only nodded, heading straight to the makeshift kitchen, where Isabel and the children soon joined him. They sat around the plain table and began eating the fresh bread and cheese he had brought, accompanied by hot coffee that filled the chilly morning air with a comforting aroma. The moment was wrapped in silence, broken only by the faint sounds of utensils and the soft chewing of food. Gathering her courage, Isabel finally broke the quiet. "I want to thank you for taking us in. Our home was destroyed by the storm. We had nowhere else to go." Her voice trembled, heavy with emotion. He cast her a quick, assessing glance before replying with the same measured coldness. "You don't have to worry about that anymore. You'll stay here, as long as you need to." Isabel felt a lump rise in her throat, but also a deep wave of relief. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered almost under her breath. He made a small gesture, avoiding direct eye contact. "No need," he said simply, taking the last sip of his coffee. Isabel hesitated for a moment, looking at him with a mix of determination and gratitude. "I want to help," she said firmly. "I can take care of the children, help in the kitchen, do whatever's needed. I don't want to be a burden." He watched her in silence for a few seconds, then gave a faint nod, accepting her offer without many words. As soon as he finished his breakfast, Isabel, summoning her courage, asked, "May I know your name?" He held her gaze for a moment, as if deciding whether he could trust her. "My name is Mateo," he finally answered, his voice steady but without the trace of a smile. "My name is Isabel," she said in return, with a shy, tentative smile. That day, Mateo prepared a simple yet welcoming room in the guest house for Isabel and the children. A modest space, but for them, it was the closest thing to a home they'd had in a long time. The silence between them persisted, but in the small gestures, the care in bringing food, the quiet concern for the children, a fragile hope began to stir, marking the beginning of a new story. The days that followed on the ranch settled into a routine that, while simple, brought Isabel and the children a sense of peace they hadn't felt in years. The clean air, the birdsong, and the vast open fields created a world entirely different from the restless, uncertain life they had left behind. Mateo remained reserved, keeping his natural coolness, but little by little, his actions revealed a quiet concern. Isabel helped in the kitchen, tended to the children, and tried to make that place feel like a home for all of them. One sunny afternoon, Luis and his sisters, Ana and Sofia, were playing near a small grove, running and laughing between the trees. The joy on their faces lit up the fields, and for a moment, Isabel allowed herself to forget their troubles. Suddenly, Luis tripped over a root hidden under the dry leaves and fell, scraping his knee on the ground. His loud cry pierced the air, echoing across the ranch. Mateo, working in the nearby barn, heard it immediately. Without hesitation, he set down his tools and ran toward the children. When he arrived, he found Luis on the ground, tears streaming down his face as he tried to hold back the pain. Mateo crouched beside the boy, lifting him into his arms with care just as Isabel rushed over. "Easy, Luis," he said in a voice that was firm yet gentle. "We'll take care of that scrape." He cleaned the scraped knee with fresh water and then applied an ointment he usually kept for the animals, explaining that it would help the wound heal faster. "It'll get better soon, don't worry," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. Isabel watched the scene with a mix of relief and admiration. It was the first time she had seen Mateo show such tenderness, and her heart warmed with a hope that maybe, just maybe, her family might finally find some peace. Luis stopped crying and, holding the rancher's hand tightly, smiled for the first time that day. In that instant, the bond between them seemed stronger, and the silence that had once existed between Isabel and Mateo began to give way to a new closeness. That same night, the ranch was wrapped in an almost reverent quiet. The sky was clear, sprinkled with bright stars that seemed to watch from above like keepers of old secrets and silent promises. The cool night air drifted softly, carrying the scent of damp earth and trees. Mateo sat on the wooden porch of the main house, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze lost on the dark horizon. Moonlight washed over his face, highlighting the lines of weariness and pain he carried. The weight of years of sorrow seemed to press down on his broad shoulders, and the silence around him was his only solace. Suddenly, the door opened gently, and Isabel stepped out, her footsteps light on the wood, her face lit with a mixture of hesitation and courage. She carried a small cup of tea she had prepared, the steam rising in delicate spirals. "Mateo," she called softly, her voice low and a little tense. "Are you still awake?" He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. A faint, almost unexpected glimmer appeared there. "Yes," he replied, his voice hoarse and calm. She came closer and sat beside him, the silence between them as tangible as the cold night air. "I wanted to thank you," Isabel began, her eyes fixed on the ground, fingers laced together, "for taking care of Luis today. You didn't have to, but you did. That means a lot to me, to us." Mateo glanced up at the sky, as if unsure how to handle that kind of gratitude. "You don't need to thank me," he said in a dry tone, though there was a restrained tenderness in every word. "He's strong." Isabel smiled, but her hands trembled slightly. She was gathering the courage to go on, to open a door she had kept locked for a long time. Can I ask you something?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "You can," he replied, turning to face her, his expression serious. She took a deep breath, gazing at the starry sky, feeling the weight of the words she was about to speak. "What brought you here, Mateo? I mean, what's your story?" There was a long silence, only the sound of the breeze rustling the leaves and the faint creak of the porch boards under their feet. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if searching for strength deep within himself. "I lost my wife," he began, his voice heavy with pain. "It happened too fast. Just a simple fever, or at least that's what it seemed. But it turned into something serious, something irreversible. I watched her fade away right in front of me. Since then, I've shut myself off. I couldn't open my heart to anyone again." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back, trying to show strength. "I'm so sorry, Mateo," she said softly, her voice tight with emotion. He turned his face away so she wouldn't see the emotion he himself was struggling to hide. "And you?" he asked after a while, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. "What's your story?" Isabel swallowed down the emotion threatening to spill over. She looked at her hands, pressing them together in her lap. "My husband," she began slowly, "he left me. Not just me, our children too. He went to be with another woman, leaving me alone and afraid of what the future would bring. We still had the house, but then a storm destroyed everything. I had nowhere to go." She lifted her gaze, meeting Mateo's eyes. He was watching her intently now, as if every word she spoke was a spark reigniting something long extinguished inside him. "I thought I'd never be able to start over," Isabel confessed, her voice trembling. "But here with you, I feel something different. Something I haven't felt in a very long time." He moved a little closer, the air between them thick with tension and anticipation. "Maybe two broken hearts can find a way to heal together," Mateo murmured, in a softness that seemed almost strange coming from him. But it was real. Isabel gave a small smile, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "I want to try," she said. Mateo was silent for a moment, studying her face bathed in moonlight, her tears shining like tiny pearls. Then, with a reverence that felt almost sacred, he reached out and brushed his fingers gently over the tears on her cheeks, wiping them away with tenderness. "You don't have to cry alone anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Isabel looked at him, her heart racing, and on impulse, she leaned closer. Their eyes met, filled with an intense mix of fear, hope, and longing. Mateo bent toward her slowly, as if afraid that moment could vanish in an instant. His lips met hers with a softness and passion that shattered years of loneliness and pain. The kiss was deep, full of unspoken promises and the hope of a new beginning. She wrapped her arms around his neck while he held her firmly by the waist, as if he never wanted to let her go. The porch, the night, the silence, everything else faded away, leaving only the warmth of their touch, the sound of uneven breaths, and the overwhelming feeling of two hearts finally finding each other. When they pulled away, Isabel rested her forehead against his, smiling through tear-filled eyes. And there, under the starry sky, a hope was born, so strong that no storm could ever extinguish it. After that kiss, many things changed in Mateo's and Isabel's lives. Something invisible, yet powerful, began to grow between them, a hope that bloomed even in the deepest scars. One afternoon, while they were watching the children play in the backyard, Mateo turned to Isabel, his gaze serious but filled with a determination she had never seen in him before. "Isabel," he began, his voice steady, "I have an idea. How about we go to that house? The one the storm destroyed." Isabel fell silent for a moment, her heart tightening at the mere thought of returning to that place, heavy with painful memories. "Do you think that's a good idea?" she asked, uncertain. "I think so," Mateo replied. "We need to close that chapter. Fixing the house isn't just about repairing walls and a roof. It's about giving you all a fresh start." When they arrived, the sight was even more devastating than she remembered. Collapsed walls, a partially destroyed roof, the floor covered in rubble and dried mud. The storm had left deep scars, not just on the house, but on Isabel's soul. She walked slowly, each step echoing in the silence of that abandoned place. "It feels impossible to fix all this," she murmured, her voice breaking. As if the storm had taken all the hope with it. Mateo placed a firm hand on her back, a gesture that said more than words ever could. "Nothing is impossible when we're together. We'll rebuild it, brick by brick. And we're not alone," he reminded her, glancing at the children, who were curiously inspecting every corner. The rebuilding began. Each day was a mixture of exhaustion, sweat, and small miracles. Mateo led the work with patience, teaching the children to carry bricks, plant seedlings, and paint walls. Isabel threw herself into the tasks with a newfound determination, feeling life beat strongly in her chest once more. One afternoon, while they were painting the living room, Isabel accidentally spilled some paint, and Mateo, laughing, gently wiped her face, his hand lingering just a little longer than necessary. "You really are clumsy," he teased, his eyes shining with affection. "Only with paint," she replied, smiling shyly. That simple moment sealed a feeling that had been quietly growing between them. 2 intense months followed, hard work, dust, and sweat, but also laughter and shared moments. The children helped plant the vegetable garden, paint the walls, and even carry small bricks. One afternoon, while Isabel and Mateo were painting one of the living room walls, he said with a grin, "You know, I never thought I'd see you all so excited about paint and buckets of cement." She laughed, feeling a lightness she hadn't known in a long time. It's funny how something so simple can mean so much. Mateo stopped what he was doing and looked into her eyes. "We're building more than a house," he said. "We're building a home." When the house was finally ready, on that sunny morning, Isabel walked through the rooms, admiring every detail, every color, every plant in the new garden. Her heart tightened, overflowing with emotion. "Well," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I guess now we can go back to our old life." She hesitated, because deep down, she didn't want to leave the place where so much love had blossomed. The children, their eyes shining with joy and hope, ran toward Mateo, jumping and laughing, filling the air around the farm with a contagious energy that seemed to heal every wound from the past. "Dad, we want to stay here," exclaimed Luis, the eldest, his voice full of conviction and excitement. Mateo crouched down and wrapped them in a tight embrace, feeling a profound emotion swell in his chest, as if a lost part of himself had finally come home. "You're my family," he said hoarsely, the strength of his words reflecting the love growing in his heart. "And this is where you're going to stay." Isabel watched the scene, her eyes brimming with tears that, for once, weren't from pain, but from a joy she hadn't known she could feel again. A sense of belonging that had been absent from her life for far too long. Then Mateo turned to her, his gaze both serious and tender. "And you, Isabel?" he asked softly, still holding the children's hands. She hesitated for a moment, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to stay," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I want to stay with you. With this family we're building." It was a moment of silence, when the world seemed to stop and celebrate the decision that would forever change their lives. Mateo gently cupped her face, wiping away her tears with the tips of his fingers, and his eyes met hers, deep, steady, and filled with promise. "We'll never be alone again," he murmured, before leaning in and pressing a tender, meaningful kiss to her lips. In that moment, the ranch was no longer just a piece of land. It was a true home, where old wounds had begun to heal, and where a future full of love and hope was starting to bloom. The days that followed were filled with laughter, small discoveries, and the strengthening of a bond that grew more unshakable with each passing moment. Mateo had become not only a protector, but a present and loving father, teaching the children with patience and care, while Isabel found, in the simplicity of country life, a peace she had never known before. Together, they faced hardships, always anchored by the love blossoming between them, proving that even the most wounded souls can be reborn when touched by hope. Months later, Mateo began planning something special. He wanted to propose in a way that would not only express his love for Isabel, but also honor the new family they had built together. The morning was clear and fresh, the sun shining with a gentle warmth that seemed to promise a perfect day. Isabel was kneeling in the small vegetable garden she had helped plant with the children. The scent of damp earth mingled with the sweet perfume of newly blossomed flowers. Luis, Ana, and Sofia ran around, gathering ripe tomatoes and sending their laughter drifting through the air. Isabel smiled, taking in the peaceful scene that felt so far removed from the difficult days they had endured. She was grateful to be here, surrounded by the simplicity of the ranch, and by these little souls who filled her heart with joy. Meanwhile, behind her, Mateo approached with quiet steps, carrying a small bundle in his hands. There was something different in his gaze that day, a mix of nervousness and hope. He knew he was about to take a step that would forever change the course of their lives. The children, already in on the plan, could barely contain their excitement. Luis, the eldest, with his bright, curious eyes, held Isabel's hand firmly, while Anna and Sofia bounced around, struggling not to spoil the surprise. "Mom, come here," Luis called, gently tugging her hand and guiding her toward the orchard, where Mateo was waiting. The orchard was a special place for the family. The fruit-laden trees, the unhurried birdsong, the ground carpeted in leaves that softened each step, everything there seemed to whisper stories of renewal and hope. When they arrived, the children proudly held up small signs, each painted in shaky, colorful letters by little hands full of love. "Isabel, will you marry Daddy?" Isabel froze, her heart racing. A lump rose in her throat, and tears began to well in her eyes. Mateo slowly sank to one knee before her, as if the whole world had slowed to honor this singular moment. He took her hands, holding them firmly, yet with a gentleness that sent a shiver through her. "Isabel," he began, his voice steady but charged with emotion, "I'm not a man of many words, but with you, and with these children, I've discovered what real love is. Will you be my wife? Will you keep building this family with me?" Silence hung for a heartbeat, long enough to make time feel infinite. Isabel let the tears stream freely down her face, her eyes glowing with a smile that seemed to radiate from deep within her. "Yes, Mateo, I will," she replied, her voice trembling, her heart overflowing. The children burst into joyous laughter, rushing to hug them both, their giggles mingling with happy tears. Mateo rose, pulling Isabel into a tight embrace, feeling her steady against his chest, savoring the warmth of a moment that sealed the future they both longed for. The soft breeze rustled the leaves above, and the sun seemed to shine brighter, as if it too were celebrating this new life that began here, in the heart of the ranch, in the warmth of this family. That day, they sat together making plans for the future, the dreams, the challenges, the joys they wanted to share. And even knowing the road ahead would have its trials, they were ready to face them side by side. Mateo, once a solitary, closed-off man, now felt the ranch was no longer just land, cattle, and hard work. It was a home brimming with life, hope, and love, all because of the brave woman and the family he had embraced with his whole heart and soul. Isabel looked at him, her hand in his, and knew she had finally found what she had been searching for all along, a place where she could love and be loved, without fear.